This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states.
Hello and welcome to the Niler 9 podcast. You're listening to episode 259 of the Niler 9 podcast. As you may know, we are doing things a little differently at the moment. So Andrea will be with us every second week or so. She'll be back next week when we're going to discuss a special artist in her canon and a special cool big guy. His name is Father John Misty. So we'll be doing a listen closely around that event on the 25th of September. So that episode will drop next week. But this episode is all about one of the biggest Irish album releases of the year. It is, of course, the Fontaines, and the album is called Romance. We're going to be talking to the journalist and writer Aoife Barry about the album. We've obviously in the past covered the albums from the Fontaines before, the whole story around them, all the things in relation to their Irishness. So we've done every album so far. So we're kind of keeping it up now. Skinty Fia, obviously the last one in 2022. Before that, A Hero's Death, and then Doggerel, which kicked it all off. So I'm interested to talk about this new album in the context of the band's career, in context of where they're at, in context of what does it sound like? Is it good? Is it different? Is it new? Is there new metal thing actually a thing? Or we got something else going on here? So we're going to get into it with Aoife Barry. In the meantime, if you like what you hear on the podcast, you can always support us directly, where you get the Patreon best of the month episodes every month now only in full. And that is patreon.com/909. If you are already a subscriber, we really appreciate you. You know that already. Come and say hello in the Discord if you're not. It's a great place to hang out. I say it all the time. That's where we are. Okay, patreon.com/909. Now, on with the chat with Aoife Barry.
I wanna shatter the stone, I wanna bounce the bone, I wanna mess with it, I wanna lay to the veil, a whole crew in the seal, I want the preacher appeal, I wanna bless with it, I wanna head to a mass to get cast in it, a shit's funnier than any A class in it, I wanna talk to the clown who wants apologies down, pay him £300 and take a class in it, I wanna bite the phone, I wanna bleed the town, I wanna see you alone, 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 I wanna straight the shack, and find me someone to pack, like the light when it's dark, it's dark, it's dark, dark, a few stairs about, make a feel like peace in a way, compliment around, consolation got a twist in it, for a GPO and all the hits in it, I'm gonna hit your business if it's momentary business, I'm gonna hit your business if it's momentary business, I'm gonna hit your business if it's momentary business, I'm gonna hit your business if it's momentary.
Aoife Barry is here to chat about the Romance album from the Fontaines D.C, their fourth album. Now it's their first on XL Recordings. So new label, new look, new sound. Is that the case? Or we'll talk about it, I think. Aoife?
I'm good. I'm not too bad. I'm accompanied here by an elderly dog. So if you hear some really strange wheezing in the background occasionally, that is the dog. I'm not too sure if he's
What's
a
his
Fontaines DC fan. His name is Dexter.
Dexter.
Dexter, yes, he's 15, so he's getting on in years. But yeah, he's almost as old as the Fontaines. But I know, I joke.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, so I'm all good.
Previously, we've ended up reviewing the Fontaines records because myself and Andrea have discussed it. Now, Andrea is very much of a persuasion where she doesn't really rate the band, but the phenomenon is interesting. That's why we're here to talk about Fontaines, because I think, the thing about the Fontaines is they're one of the biggest Irish bands of the last 15 years. Yeah. And it's always interesting to discuss, and I think it really gives us, as Irish people, a really interesting perspective, because we get to hear what other people around the world think of this Irish band. Now, maybe on Romance, it's less important this time because they're not really, this isn't an album where they're talking about the Irish perspective. On Skinty Fia, they were talking about, being Irish in London and the diaspora, and it was quite a bleak and dark album, really. in terms of where
Yeah.
they were from. And then A Hero's Death, the second album, was somewhere between Ireland and England and the touring life, and it referenced that. And then obviously Doggerel is their Dublin album. But what we've seen is the contrast and the shift from the band certainly in terms of lyrics here. There's a lot less references to Dublin as a place. There might be a few. The GPO is referenced at one point. In setting the album up themselves, the Fontaines have kind of said that we've always had this sense of idealism and romance. Conor Deegan says, each album gets further away from observing that through the lens of Ireland as directly as Doggerel. The second album, Hero's Dead, is about that detachment, and the third, Skinty Fia, is about Irishness located in diaspora. Now we look to where and what else there is to be romantic about. Now, when I read that originally, when I first read it when Starburster came out, I kind of went, uh-oh, what does this mean? So the idea, it's called Romance. I mean, they're like, Romance is a Place is the opening track. What were your first impressions of this? Did you think that, first of all, we had first of all, we had Starburster as the first single, very much a self-contained kind of spiky guitar pop song, kind of felt like this is a new era for the band. It even though it references the GPO and all the hits in it, it does feel like a very markedly different thing. Kind of, for some reason, it keep reminding me of Oasis. So maybe it's just because we're in the Oasis mode now with all the reunion stuff. But it does feel like the song Starburster was designed to kind of shake the cobwebs of people's expectations.
Definitely.
I wonder, do you think it kind of set them up for a fall a bit, or because there's not really any songs on the record like that?
I don't think it set them up for a fall. I think it set out the stall for what to expect for them, which is that they've moved on, or they've evolved their sound. And I think that towards the end of the album, which we'll probably get into, there's other songs that I feel are kind of similar in vibe to Starburster. But I also feel like when they brought that out, it was clever because they are a band that are clever about their image, about the media. They weren't these naive young lads who appeared at Doggerel and were like, oh, people want to interview us. They had this distinct, look and sound and attitude from day one. And when they came out with this single and the first kind of images that have come out of the band before the record came out, I was like, oh my God, it's 2000s staring me in the face. It's my teenage years are back, or even the 90s, should I say, are staring me in my face, with the style that they went for. They're wearing the kind of Oakley style sunglasses. They have the dyed hair. It's Keith Flint, Prodigy vibes.
That's what I
Babylon
thought.
Zoo
Prodigy
vibes.
Yeah, Babylon Zoo. Yeah.
All that kind of era. And I was like, hold on, that's on purpose. Obviously it's on purpose, right? But what are they trying to say when they do that? They're trying to say, obviously they're harking back to what is their youth when they were really young. But also what was happening in that era, is interesting to look back on too. Why are they referencing all of this color and this kind of this aesthetic? Are they saying that there's something more playful about themselves now, that they're not the dark lads that made Doggerel, that were kicking around the city and going into the pubs and reading Joyce or a copy of Yeats' poems in their back pocket, all that kind of stuff? That there's something more, there's something lighter, something more fashionable about them, that they're paying attention to style, and one of the members of the band's wife is a model and actress, and I kind of wondered about the milieu that he's kind of hanging around it now. Is that influencing their idea of how far you can push your aesthetic, that kind of thing too? So I thought that all of that was really interesting around the aesthetics, what they're trying to do, the fact that they know people will ask questions about why are you referencing this period of time. And I also noted that when that single came out, they mentioned Korn as an influence on the album before the album came out, and there are little Korn bits and bobs going on, I suppose. But I thought that was them very but I thought that was them pushing back also to be oh hey God, we're gonna try to reference this kind of uncool yet loved band, and it's not what you expect out of us. So that was, I suppose, that's the background to what I was thinking around that period of time, and even just before I got to listen to this record. But I don't think they set up people for a fall, but I don't think you get this full on 2000s record either. You actually had a lot of 90s grunge.
I think,
going
in
on
fairness,
too.
they may have mentioned Korn, but I think a lot of critics maybe ran with that as it's a new metal.
Yeah.
There's a new metal vibe happening here, and it really
Yeah.
isn't. Like, I mean,
No,
it's
not at all.
grungy maybe, but new metal,
Definitely, yeah.
no. There's no really new metal there on this album. But I mean, what it does have is maybe, you know, I mean, obviously the new look signifies something. The new label as well, XL, the biggest
XL, yeah.
basically indie label in the world. And then, I mean, is there a new sound here? Well, I mean, for me, not quite, but Romance does find them reaching for some fresh sounds in the guitar world for them anyway. I mean, certainly they're a long way away from their kind of jangly rock. And funny enough, one of the best songs on this album is Favorite, which is the last song, which is very much like a jangly pop rock song.
Yeah.
And then within that, then you have a lot of various styles. There's obviously a shoegaze track on this. There's a lot of references to 80s and Irish and indie UK, 80s Irish and UK indie music. Like, I always think of Whipping Boy when I think of the Fontaines these days.
Same.
Yeah.
Totally.
And then
Yeah, they're spot on.
what probably is new is my 90s alt rock kind of vibe and the grungy vibe here. So like less of the post-punk references and less of the jangle rock, but more of this all-encompassing guitar thing. Is it because do you think that they're like, you know, they are this globe-trotting world touring band now, and a lot of times when bands fall into that mode, they kind of slip into this different sound where they're kind of trying to bring in all of these like gargantuan influences. I think maybe what makes a big difference here is that this is the first album. I think this is probably one of the biggest changes here is that it's not produced by Dan Carey for the first time. It's produced by James Ford. James Ford, who has worked with a lot of bands who are well used to big stages like Arctic Monkeys, Blur, Depeche Mode, Florence and the Machine, Gorillaz, stuff like that. So we're talking about going from the indie producer du jour, Dan Carey, to somewhere which is someone who's very comfortable making those big rock records.
Yeah, and I always, when I hear or kind of see references to stuff like going for a stadium sound, I'm always like, oh no. Like, you know, that idea of like you're talking about that band getting to the stage where they're like, we got to make an album that's going to sound good in stadiums, guys. And you're like, oh no. You know, I think of bands like Coldplay and stuff like that, you know, when I think of that. That's just one, obviously, that's just one small reference. But I do think you're right in that they have gone for a more full sound with a lot of things going on. But I don't think they're reaching so far that they're like, hey, we want to get like everybody in the big stadium to watch us. They still retain that like that rock sensibility, you know, that indie sensibility. And I do think that the change in producer is really interesting. And you know, I'm not a musician, like I've never been in the studio making an album, but I'd imagine from what I've read and everything is that like the producer comes in with their own ideas, right? So he's coming in there and picking out what he thinks that would work well with the band sound in order to evolve the sound. And in any collaboration that we've all been part of, like that's really exciting because it shows you what you're capable of. So I'm sure that the band were meeting up with him, with James Ford, and having discussions about like, I like this, I like that, how can we bring this in? And he says, oh, I see you doing this, I see you doing that. So I think that collaboration must have been really interesting for them, and it's definitely like fruitful for them in terms of the sounds that they're exploring. And I really do like that they've gone into the shoegaze sound for some of the tracks. I think that feels like a natural evolution for them. Like I do feel differently about this record maybe to you about it compared to Skinty Fia. I definitely feel like there's a little bit of a lightness to this.
No, I'd agree with that.
Fia.
I think it's brighter.
Yeah,
I think it's
brighter.
Definitely,
yeah,
vocally it's brighter. I think, yeah, like there's a lot more string orchestration, for example, throughout the record. I think
really like that.
There's a lovely palette there, actually, and I think there's some really interesting guitar tones and tones in general. And I think like really, Grian Chatten's vocals after doing his solo record, Chaos for the Fly, I feel like he has kind of expanded his range slightly here in a way
he's
that
mellowed.
Yeah, I think he's less guttural. He's more melodic. He soars more. He's almost like also taking on some influences more directly. Like we'll talk a bit maybe more about In the Modern World, very much a Lana Del Rey style song, and that's an interesting. The falsetto on Here's the Thing, that new song.
Yeah.
It certainly does suggest that, you know, an increased confidence, and also maybe more of a pop vocal, kind of centered pop vocal, very like direct, very tight. As opposed to, there are songs on this where he does kind of do what you are expecting him to do in terms of Like I think of that song Dead King, the second last track.
Mhm.
It's very much like kind of a howling guttural kind of vocal thing where the lines are over the beats of the music, and it's kind of, it draws you in that way. But there's like Starburster obviously is the obvious comparison, taking hip hop kind of vocals and cadences as influences and
Yeah.
bringing them into a very tight kind of vocal melody that, you know, is new for him, certainly.
Yeah, it is. And I really enjoyed that because, to be honest, my least favorite part of the Fontaines has always been the vocals.
Okay.
Like, to go back to your Oasis reference, there's a bang of the Oasis delivery from Grian Chatten from day one, right? And you're either really into that or you're not. And I think that's kind of grated with me. Now, that said, I went back and re-listened to Doggerel because I hadn't listened to it in I don't know how long. And it works so well with that style of music because it is that like really punchy, you know, kind of almost Larry, like we're here, like you have to have that kind of vocal for it. But I've always struggled with that element of Fontaines. And I really felt like relieved to hear that what you're talking about there, the different styles of him kind of going up into his head voice, of kind of rolling back a bit from that like intensity, showing that he has just more to him than that kind of Doggerel era. And I also really like that you get the backing vocals, and you also get vocals from, I think, Conor Curley on one of the tracks as well. And I think that mixing up the vocals and the kind of call and response that you get in the modern world, for example, loved that. And I think that adds just more to that palette that you're talking about there, that you see like this is a band that's willing to play to its strengths, which for a lot of people is Grian Chatten's attitude when he's singing, but also willing to kind of try something a bit different. And like, I watched a video of them performing Starburster, a live video of it in kind of studio, and like their kind of swagger and confidence and belief in themselves and their look and their aesthetic and their sound, and it just sounded great. Like, it's really, really strong, you know. And I think that's I suppose that's kind of really important when it comes to them evolving, that they really believe in this evolution of themselves. Like, it's very natural, like they want to be doing this kind of pushing forward of their sound. And for me, that's really worked, and the changes have really worked and actually made me feel like I prefer this to any of their other records. I think for me this works best.
Yeah, interesting.
Maybe Doggerel fans won't want, like, maybe Doggerel fans will want them to go back to that like really pure post-punk sound that they had back in the early days when they felt really, really fresh. Whereas now you have like grunge is really mainstream again. Like Olivia Rodrigo is a grunge artist effectively, you know what I mean? And she's selling out stadiums. So they're not doing anything that's brand new, I think, in terms of what indie bands are doing now in terms of the sounds that they're kind of latching onto, but it's really working for them at the same time.
I think, you know, I think that's interesting. You think it's the best one. I definitely think it's the brightest. I definitely think, I don't know if it's the best overall. I definitely haven't gone back to Signifies this week and kind of gone, God, it's quite a dirgy record. It's quite a like dour record. And I think I didn't really revisit it much because of that. And I think Romance seems more comfortable in its own skin. It seems, I think with A Hero's Death, you do get that sense of like a band trying to break out of the Doggerel mode. And I mean, there still are band who are referencing that even when they were Grian Chatten's doing interviews in the lead up to the album. He was talking to Loud and Quiet, and he said when the record comes out, I think people will realize, I mean, we're talking about the visual stuff as well, we'll realize that it's a record influenced by a vision of dystopia. It's a futuristic record inspired by cinema. I think we just wanted to visually draw from those inspirations in order to ensure that people didn't fit the record into a Doggerel shaped box, because I think some people just want to hear Boys in Better Land over and over again, and you can just put it on a loop. It's got nothing to do with me, just a way to make sure that our new stuff was communicated the right way. So I think that's it. It's like they wanted people to be very clear that they wanted it communicated that they were doing something different. And they talked about Akira being a reference. Now, not like the style necessarily, but some of that kind of vibe. And Grian said Told Enemy as well. That's what it sounds like to me. Isn't that interesting? It doesn't sound like the soundtrack or anything like from Akira, but evokes those images. I find that a much more interesting way to create than writing a Spotify playlist of guitar tones. We spoke about pigeons taking flight at dawn, the Shubaya scramble, the feeling of a million people passing by and not seeing each other in their own world, the race to work in the morning, things like that. So, I mean, yeah, while the references are much more cinematic, and I think the record is more cinematic probably overall. Let's chat through the tracks then a little bit. And like I said, the songs are no longer referencing places overtly, but there are some references on it. Like, so the opening track, Romance, very much a scene setter, quite an ominous sounding song, all tense notes and rushing synths and with the vocals. The lyrics saying maybe romance is a place for me and you. So, I mean, is this an album about romance, do you think? Or is it, it's kind of, it's referenced a lot, but I like, it's a funny one because I don't really get the full through line for myself.
Yeah, to be honest, I was looking up all the lyrics of the songs on Genius because I was trying to figure out what on earth Grian Chatten and the other band members were writing about in this record, because I'm really interested in from the moment they first emerged, their songs have been, you know, analysed in terms of what they say about the relationship that the band has with Ireland and with Dublin in particular, even though only one of the members of the band is really from Dublin. And so they've always been a band who like people look to be like, oh, what are they saying about, you know, when they reference Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael coalition government, what do they mean about this? What is their relationship with the city streets, the authors, etc. And that's been a bugbear for some people. I know Andrea and myself, I feel similarly to Andrea on this, on the kind of mythology around Fontaines D.C. and what they say about Ireland. I don't always see the Ireland that I know in what is represented through articles about them for the international press about Ireland, right? So there's that part of it. But then I kind of was like, well, do they have to say anything? Like, do the lyrics have to mean anything? Loads of bands write lyrics on the fly in the studio just to kind of fit in with the music, and it's not about actually saying anything. And no, like that's, you know, it doesn't have to be part of it. But there's pressure on Fontaines to write songs that mean something. And yet I couldn't really find a through line throughout all the songs, although I did find a lot of dark images or dark moments and interesting kind of couplets or interesting visuals going on. But I wasn't too sure really how overt, in fact, it wasn't really overt what the meaning of the album was. And I think I was listening to an interview with Grian Chatten where he says he wrote a lot of the lyrics, I think, in the studio. So it would make sense that they're just written on the fly and they're like a response to something, whether that's a response to what he's thinking or a response to what he's hearing, or like an image that pops in when he hears a riff or something like that, or, you know, a beat or whatever, you know. But like in this track, Romance, he has lyrics like, you know, into the darkness again, in with the pigs in the pen, which is like, I think, a classic lyric by him where you're like, that sounds really interesting. Oh, he's talking about pigs in the pen. What does that mean? Like, does it actually mean anything? Like, you know, and
it's cinematic and it's
cinematic, right?
It sounds,
it's visual.
Yeah, it's very visual.
The alliteration is great. And then if you look on Genius, to go back to what I was saying at the start, people have come up with some intense meanings to so many of the lyrics to this record already that I personally don't really feel are necessarily correct in what they're saying. But perhaps that's part of it too, where because a lot of what they're saying is quite like oblique and pointing at something but not quite there, you're free to impose your own meaning on it, and you're free to be like, it's about the dystopian, you know, situation that we're in 2024 and their relationship with the music business 4 albums in and blah blah blah, and they're exiled from Ireland and blah blah blah, you know. But I didn't find any of that overtly, but I think you can probably read into individual bits if you want to.
Yeah, I feel like they've transcended those Dublin roots here for sure and embraced this universality in the lyrics. That means that you're not, okay, like I said, the GPO and Starbursters reference, but it's not about the sense of place. Like, romance is the place this time. So romance is a conceptual idea. We're dealing in metaphors and concepts here, and we're not talking about real characters or anything like that anymore, although there is a very direct story later on, inspired by their experiences that they had on tour. So there is a bit of that for sure. I think, it's a nice scene setter. I think it kind of reminds me of the first song on Signifies as well. Very much a kind of a ominous scene setter. And they describe it as kind of a palate cleanser. And then that leads into Starburster, which was the first single. Very much, like I said, I think it reminds me of Oasis. It reminds me of hip hop and vocals and stuff like that. Very tight, spiky. They say we wanted to try and shock people a bit. It was probably quite a shocking thing for people who were more of the Six Music dad heads to hear. It's fun to do that. Do you like this? I like this song. I really like this song. I really
like it. I think it's one of their best songs. I mean, maybe it says more about me that I'm like, I really like the brighter sounding stuff. I just like that I really like that they took, because, okay, the bit where it comes from Grian Chatten having a panic attack, and they take that really strong intake of breath that he has multiple times to kind of punctuate lines in the song. Initially, when I heard that, I thought, oh God, that's a bit of a gimmick. And then the more I listened to it, the more I thought, oh, actually, that's really, really cool. And it's really, really clever. And it sounds great. And it looks really cool to watch him do it, I think. And for fans, it like adds this kind of frisson of something kind of interesting to the track. And it shows that they're playing around with real life experiences that are really difficult, like having a panic attack is no joke, but turning that into art, you know? So I kind of changed my mind on it, going from it being gimmicky to actually sounding good. And I do think that like it's them, to me, it feels like this new version of them, and this really evolved version of them, where you have the strong vocals from Chatten, and you have, you know, those lyrics about like, I want to take the truth without a lens on it, you know, that people can really kind of analyze, even though it might not mean necessarily anything too deep. I want the pig on a Chinese calendar, like delivered in that like really strong Dublin accent, sounds really good. So I think it's great. It's dark. It's kind of maybe a bit tongue in cheek in places, and it's clearly fun for them, I think, to play live, and there's loads of different things going on with it, which I think, and I think they all work really, really well.
I mean, in that spirit, they're kind of got the closest they have so far to a band they say is one of their inspirations, Gillaband. You know, it's like there's a band who have made a lyrical career out of panic attacks and you know, dealing with your mental health. And there is like so a callback almost to a band that they very rarely admit that they love, Gillaband. So that leads into track 3. Here's the thing. For me, this is I'm really trying to escape, not just go, hey, it sounds like Whipping Boy, but like I just can't. Every time I'm like, well, it sounds like Whipping Boy. Now there is more like kind of metallic rock sounds on this, and I think it's crucially not new metal. Some critics have widely suggested I'd hear more of a Nirvana grunge influence maybe in the guitars.
Definitely.
But I really liked Here's the Thing as well, because again, he's doing a falsetto thing. There's something different going on, but it's very clean and direct, I think, as well. So that's the one that's kind of one of the songs that's really grown on me. Now, what did you think of this one?
Yeah, it's really catchy, and it's a single. It's one of the singles, and it really works, I think, as a single. And yeah, like the guitars sound, there's like a melody, kind of guitar melody going on there that I thought was really nice as well. Like that's kind of catchy, because I was listening back to some kind of classic grunge to like remind myself of what makes grunge, and a lot of the kind of 90s bands that take from that, or the kind of indie rock, not indie rock, but a kind of sort of grunge bands that take from that sound quite really melodic and bright, and actually like a lot brighter and lighter than what Fontaines are doing with this, if you get me. But in this, they actually have something that sounds a little bit melodic and bright, and that harks back to that era, I think, with the guitar. And it's a lot of these kind of fuzzy layers to it that I really liked as well too.
I used to think buying foundation online was impossible. How am I supposed to find my shade when I can't even get it right in store? Then I discovered Il Maquillage. I took their AI-powered quiz to find my custom match, and wow, this foundation is literally my skin in a bottle. The undertone and coverage are spot on. It's so neutral and weightless, I can't even tell I'm wearing makeup. Plus, with Try Before You Buy, you can try your full size at home for 14 days. Take the Power Match quiz now at ilmaquillage.com/quiz. ILMAKIAGE.com/quiz.
Getting engaged can be stressful. Getting the right ring won't be at BlueNile.com. The jewelers at BlueNile.com have sparkle down to a science with beautiful lab-grown diamonds worthy of your most brilliant moments. Their lab-grown diamonds are independently graded and guaranteed identical to natural diamonds, and ready to ship to your door. Get $50 off your purchase of $500 or more with code LISTEN at BlueNile.com. That's BlueNile.com, code LISTEN for $50 off.
And then lyrically, stuff about like, you know, being anesthetized and craving emotion, and, you know, I feel your pain, it's mine as well. It gives us more of that, like, oh, what are they talking about? Without necessarily telling us what on earth he actually does mean when he says that. So I think that is it is one of the better songs, best songs on the record, I think.
Desire Now, that was the song for me in track 4 where I kind of was like, it's a slightly meandering kind of atmospheric tune. It's notable for its string quartet. I have here, like, it feels a bit like a 9 Inch Nails kind of flood production, 90s flood production.
I had Smashing Pumpkins written down, so
well, that too.
There,
exactly. There
yeah.
you go. Yeah. So Carlos O'Connell, the guitarist, and Grian Chatten, the singer, were the main arrangers of the strings on this record, and it was the first time they got an actual string quartet in, as opposed to just enlisting someone. So I think they really enjoyed that experience as well, and you can hear that on this track. And then it goes into In the Modern World. And again, you're talking about Grian Chatten's vocals. Well, the way he says, Charlene. So, so this is a song inspired by a trip that Grian Chatten and Conor Curley took to Penn Island in Ontario, looking for an escape from the pressures of fame. There they met Charlene, a fellow Irish traveller who introduced them to, basically gave them an anesthetic drug that numbed their senses, and they kind of realised, this is actually really nice. So they've wandered around detached and feeling kind of at peace with themselves. And the song is kind of about that, free from the anxieties of the modern world. Like it says, I feel alive in the city you despise, and then that flips it on the head later on. So it's very much like, this is the Lana Del Rey song for me. It's like, I've taken my prescription drugs. There's wistful strings in the distance. It's kind of mid-tempo, and it's you're discovering a sense of clarity in your numbness.
In the modern world, I don't feel anything. In the modern world, I don't feel bad. Shining on the corner, wait for just a minute. Come away with me inside, I promise you'll be in it. I don't feel bad. In the modern world, I don't feel, no, I don't feel bad. As long as I'm home, as long as I'm home, as long as I'm home, there's no feeling to draw. Maybe the reason that I belong. As long as I'm home, there's no feeling to draw. Maybe the reason that I belong.
So I can't think of anything more Lana Del Rey ASMR than that.
I think that reference is definitely being picked up on by people who are like really like, there's something really appealing about them doing their Lana Del Rey.
Yeah, no, it's obviously fresh for them as well.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
And obviously, it helped probably that, it's the man singing, not a woman singing. So there is some contrast there, even though it sounds exactly. When you copy it, you're like, oh my God, this is a Lana Del Rey song. Really interesting. What about the next song, Bug? I found that it reminds me of The Killing Moon by Echo and the Bunnymen.
Oh,
Very
yeah,
much
good
like
spot.
80s classic kind of rock, that kind of melodies as well.
Well, yeah, and even just to go back to In the Modern World, that I think is my favorite song on the record. I was really taken by it. I think I really love the almost like the call and response vocals that you have going on in the chorus, and I just love what they did with that, and just the way they play with the kind of with the harmonies and the lines and stuff in it. I just think that's just, I really, really love it. It's just so appealing to me to listen to that.
Yeah,
and like the way the backing vocal, like the response vocals are kind of lower down in the mix and kind of a little bit fuzzier. Like there's just kind of a lot of depth to it. I thought I just really, really enjoyed it. And it is probably the most, going back to the story you were telling, the most obvious kind of narrative story, like within the album. And there's an anthemic feel to that where you can kind of sing along to like and be like, yeah, the modern world, I don't feel anything, so I think that they capture some spirit of the age in that track as well too. I was much less taken by Bug. I have Oasis written down here for some reason. It just didn't really do anything for me. I felt like it was just a kind of like grand. I mean, Bug and Motorcycle Boy I actually like less than Bug, so maybe actually
I think that's probably the weakest song on the record.
Yeah,
I think
his
ploddy, vocals
right?
kind of lacking. The tune is lacking in dynamism as well. I mean, it's kind of an interesting lyrical influence as well, and what he talks about. They said this is inspired by the Smashing Pumpkins a bit, and it says it was the real genesis of the record. But I found it very kind of, it wasn't a bit staid. The song was inspired by Matt Dillon and the character he plays in the film Rumblefish from 1983, and was written by Grian for his brother.
Right.
I have a younger brother, he says, who has recently become very interested in poetry and literature. I see him as the character of Matt Dillon in the film, the younger brother of Mickey Rourke, who tries to find his way into life while his older brother is always away. I've seen my brother's interest in poetry and literature as his way of getting in touch with me. I wrote Motorcycle Boy for him. The line, all the life I've shown you will own you in time, is a warning for him. Since at the end, the life you live is the only one life you have. So he said that's for his brother. So, I mean, that's kind of sweet, but also like,
Yeah.
you know, acknowledging that he is the brother who's often away and not there for his sibling, and his sibling is kind of going down the same route, you know, maybe in order to kind of understand that. Now, the lyrics don't really give you that vibe at all. But
No, not at all. They're like, our church bells, they rang. No one wants the madness. They start to understand it's fine. I know you rain, I snow, I think is what he sings at some point. That's just from me listening to it as opposed to reading those lyrics. So yeah, God, you really don't get that. I mean, it's really nice that he wrote that for his brother. It's just a pity that the song is very ploddy. You know,
yeah.
You know, it's just dun, 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 dun. And just to go back to Bug for a second, there's a line in it that I think he says she's an MUA at Carnegie Hall. Am I wrong? That's what he said, like a makeup artist at Carnegie Hall. Like, yeah, it's very, very funny line. Again, probably means nothing, but like is really, really very Fontaines D.C. And yeah, I think like it's got that, Bug has those classic vocals, Motorcycle Boy, you know, pretty similar. But it's interesting that Smashing Pumpkins is a reference for Motorcycle Boy. It doesn't quite come through as strongly as on other records. But it is really cool to see Smashing Pumpkins being, I think, mentioned as a reference by younger bands now, because Smashing Pumpkins' album Adore was the record that one of the members of Fontaines said in an interview was the record in particular that they were referencing while making this. When it came to Smashing Pumpkins anyway, one of the references they were talking about. And it's interesting, kind of, I remember when Adore came out, and I really love Adore, but it definitely was a time for Smashing Pumpkins where people, long-term fans, are less into that particular evolution of the band, because they were a lot more poppy, and, you know, there was more like, yeah, they're just more of a pop band. They weren't the kind of pure melancholy band, you know. So I think that's interesting that when you have, I think, younger generations catching on to bands later, they would kind of cling on to albums that at the time maybe didn't get the love and adoration, to take a pun in the album title, that they got at the time, and that they can actually see something really great in Adore, which is, I think, still a really great Smashing Pumpkins record, but isn't probably the record that you might have wanted at the time, and was probably the last great Smashing Pumpkins record before they started making not so good ones.
Yeah, I checked out that one, I think, for sure. That was the one where I was like, nah, don't like this as much.
Yeah,
it's
very
not for
pop-like.
me. Yeah. I must
still
go
hold it
back
close
and
to my heart, though.
give it a listen. It's been a while, so I must have a listen. But yeah, we talked about the Smashing Pumpkins, but there's also very much a shoegaze vibe, especially the next track, Sundowner.
Yeah, big time.
We're talking, there's a real Cocteau Twins shoegazy vibe on this. It's the first song. It's notable because it's the first song that Grian Chatten doesn't sing. Connor Curley sings, and it's actually really lovely, described as an ode to friendship. And this is the one that I was like, I would imagine you like this. I might just play a second of this now, just to give us Yeah, it's nice to have that different vocal tone, and it's actually something that reminded me of something I really liked about. Now, Chaos for the Fly, the Grian Chatten solo record, wasn't totally my buzz, but I did like a lot of the songs on it, like a good number of songs on it. But what I really liked was the backing vocals, the female backing vocals on that record. And sometimes I just wish there was more of a female representation in the Fontaines, you know, something that was like, we don't always have to be the lads.
What? No, they do have to be the lads, and that's the point.
They are. But, you know, I mean, I just think sometimes it would be nice to hear a different tone, maybe a female tone as well on a record like this. And that's when I realized, oh yeah, that's not them singing, or that's not Grian singing. It's a different kind of thing.
I absolutely loved this song. Yeah, I mean, I'm I'm such a big shoegaze fan. I love shoegaze. And I kept thinking of bands like Ride, listening to it in particular. I think just the texture of the vocals in that are kind of gentle in a way, like Ride's vocals, particularly on songs like Vapor Trail and stuff. So I really, really like that. And again, I like that the vocals were kind of buried a bit. So you go from this like out there Grian Chatten to like this kind of, more layered, almost half hidden vocals on it. Really, really lovely. And again, though, the guitar bit kind of reminded me a bit of Spaceman by Babylon Zoo. I don't know why I keep coming back to that. Maybe it's because that was all we had to listen to because we had no internet back in whatever year it was that song came out. It was everywhere, kids.
Was it 1996?
Not a very good song.
Babylon Zoo.
I think it might have been that. Yeah, it's just like pretty not the word.
1996, January 1996.
Oh, well done. Good. That is why you're an Isla 9. So yeah, no, I really love the song, and I would love to hear more from them. And I'd love to hear like what could they do if they really pushed the shoegaze sound, because in a way it might be easy to replicate shoegaze, but like what can you get out of it? Like if you think of a band like Cocteau Twins, like I don't think there's any band that sounds like Cocteau Twins, even though they are kind of part of that era. They're so unique. So they really, like, what could Fontaines do if they were playing around? They'd never get the vocals obviously as good as Elizabeth. Liz Fraser,
in many ways, Romance the album is kind of like a choose your own adventure for where they're going to go next. Almost, it like kind of feels like it could be the next one could go into that shoegaze vibe. They could go into a heavier rock thing. They could go into a grungy thing. Or they could completely ignore all that and do an acoustic album next. Who knows? But I think that suggestion of possibility is also something that I really like about the record, because I think when I go back and visit Skinty Fee, I feel like, okay, we're doing the repetitive kind of dour thing now, and we're really grinding it into the ground, and then like overall, I'm like, well, there's obviously great singles like Jackie Down the Line and I Love You on that record, but like they stand out more than some of the other tracks on it, where I think overall my favorite tracks on this are the singles like Starburster, Here's the Thing, In the Modern World, and Favorite. I think Favorite has become my gentle favorite in recent. But before we get to that, we have of course the required Joycean reference on a Fontaines album, and this time it wasn't Grian Chatten, it was the guitarist Carlos O'Connell, who recently had a daughter, and the inspiration came from reading Joyce novels aloud to his daughter. So, of course, okay, do you know what I mean? Yeah, well, like, how many parents do that? No, really though. Very would you read? No,
would you read Ulysses to your child?
I won't be reading Nisha. No, he loves his books that he loves are Where's Mr. Narwhal? Stuff like that. Very simple. Age. Very simple. He's 9 months next weekend, so he's not going to be reading. He's not going to be reading Ulysses anytime soon. But
Daddy, what's existentialism? Like you don't need that when they're like don't read Ulysses to your children.
They're doing it because the cadence of Joyce is very much like it's almost a stream of consciousness a lot of the time. So true. Hoarseness is the whatness of all horse, streams of tendency and eons they worship. God, noise in the street, very peripatetic. So that is where that Hoarseness is the Whatness song comes from. And it's quite a sweet one as well, because it's like it is maybe a bit more direct vocally and lyrically, because it says, will someone find out what the word is that makes the world go round? Because I thought it was love, but some say that it has to be choice. I read it in some book, that book being a Joyce book, or an old packet of smokes. So I do like that.
There's something, yeah.
And they're very
that just cracks me up for some reason. Yeah.
The recent Enemy interview that Grian did, I think it was like 2 minutes before he mentioned James Joyce, but he was so self-aware about it. He was like, just to get my Joyce reference in, he was like, there you go. Like it was within 2 minutes of the interview starting. He'd mentioned it. So like, they clearly are fans.
Yes, and they must really be aware of it. Like I went back and reread that New York Times article from was it 2018, 2019 about them? That is like such a New York Times article about Fontaines, where it mentions Yeats, and it really just like, he's like, he turns up with a paperback, a Flann O'Brien, third policeman or something in his pocket, and it's just like it leans into every single trope and stereotype. And again, that is the author, that is the journalist writing it. It's not like the band didn't write it themselves, but they must clearly be very aware of this fact that they are kind of always referencing the great old dead men. The dead.
Those were
men.
the things that like irked us as well. We were like, God, come on.
Yeah.
This is like Paddy Wackery on a cultural level now, where you're like,
yeah,
all good, you know, Ireland, brilliant. Yeah. Okay, put it in your pocket, walk around with it. Do you read it? Maybe. Is it important that you get it in? It seems to be, because every international journalist who interviewed them was picking up on it, and you're like, okay, this is getting out of hand, you know. And I mean, they are Fontaines D.C, you know, it's Dublin City. They're a long way from Dublin City now, but yeah, I mean, that is the pull, the cultural pull that they always seem to have, which brings them back to Joyce for whatever reason.
And I think just while we're on the topic, I think what's interesting is like, do international journalists come to a band like Fontaines D.C. who wear their Irishness really, really obviously like out there on their sleeve, or their sense of Irishness on their sleeve? Do they come to the articles with kind of stereotypes already in their head about Irishness in Ireland, and they have them confirmed, you know, or, you know, and that's how it's coming across? Or are the band, how much of the band leaning into it? Like, I do think there's probably an interplay between the two things, where the band know New York Times is going to love if you turn up with a Flann O'Brien like novel in the back of your pocket, you know, in your back pocket. But also, they also know, like I was reading an interview with Jack Lowden earlier, and the American journalist asked him, were there cultural differences between himself and Saoirse Ronan, because he's Scottish and she's Irish? Because if you're Irish or Scottish, you'll know there's not really that many cultural differences between the two countries for many reasons. But if you're American, you're not going to know that. So there is that sense of like trying to figure out the Irish culture, I think, if you are an international writer. And I do get that. As someone who goes out like yourself and interviews people, you know, like we're going to come to things with our kind of, you know, tropes and stereotypes in our mind or whatever. But I kind of wonder how far are the band moving from that now. They don't seem to be leaning as much into it, but I think you're right that like obviously this is a clear Joycean reference, so they're not abandoning that altogether.
Yeah.
But, you know, I found that quite difficult about the band for the first few years. I was like, what, you know?
There is another world where the Fontaines actually turned it into the Pogues, you know, like well, I mean, that's where they could have gone, because even their engagement with Tom Call, the drummer, doing trad compilations. Yes. I think Tom also, well, maybe it's just Tom particularly, is playing with the Pogues kind of bands that's here coming to the Three Arena. So there are a number of people, but mostly Tom, it seems, who is like really interested in exploring that sound. And I know the band are obviously interested in the Pogues, and there's parallels there, and there's certainly parallels on the last record, Skinty Fia, with that track, what was it called? The People. The
one with the accordion on it, is it?
Yeah.
That was it.
The couple across the way.
That's a good point. Yeah,
but they could have easily, I mean, they still might. They could easily return to that kind of like diasporic Irishness on their later records. But for now, we're not there. We have a song like Death Kink, which is very much picking up a pace, a bit more kind of grungy. I have to say, an impressive use of the word meretricious here. A song which means apparently attractive but of having no real value, and yeah, that's in the chorus there, so fair play to Grian Chatten for doing that. I thought it like use it in a sentence. That's what he's doing there, so I think it's really nice, and definitely kind of lifts up the record again towards the end, when we're kind of mid pace a little bit over around, like from tracks 5 to 8, it's kind of a bit more mid tempo. And do you like that track, the Death Kink song?
I do. I agree with you. I think that it's funny. It's kind of like not a seesaw, but like a curve, like, right? It's like a U curve. You know, the album starts kind of high, then it kind of dips in the middle, then lifts back up at the end. It dips in terms of tone and stuff. And like we mentioned, some of the less attractive songs are in the middle. I really like Death Kink. I really like the kind of crunchy guitar sounds that are on it. That I think it opens with the really crunchy kind of guitar riff that sounds so 90s, and it's just kind of will bring flashbacks to anybody who's, you know, kind of was a teenage fan of or 20s fan of grunge. And again, Whipping Boy was, I think, a really obvious influence, or, you know, for me anyway, listening to this track. And like, yeah, I think this was a really, really good track. And I think it and Favourite, the one after it, are just two really strong songs on the album. And Favourite goes back to that Smashing Pumpkins reference again for me. It has that kind of jangly sound and a bit of ride as well too. And actually, Favourite going back to what we were talking about the topics on the album, favorite kind of a bit more overtly mentions Dublin and Ireland. So it's an interesting way to kind of close off the album, isn't it? Kind of going back to that.
It is, and it does. It is a song about romance. It is a song that references what it's like to be in a relationship, and it seems like a song about a relationship, you know, and the push and pull between two people living together, and how they move through the world.
Did you know I can claim the dreamer from the dream? Make you feel everything you've never even seen. Yeah, it's been a long. You were my favorite for a long time. Stitch and fall, faces rearranged. You will see beauty give way to something strange. Yeah, it's been a long. You were my favorite for a long time.
And I think it's like it is one of their it's very direct and it's very lovely, and it's very like, you don't need to be involved in the lore of Fontaines D.C. to appreciate that song. And I think that's kind of the sleeper hit on the record. I think when they first released, I was like, what is this one? It's very straightforward, but it's like, it's not exactly like the old stuff, but it does sound like it. And I think that's where it gets to with romance for me, is that there's a lot of the characteristics of what they've done before very successfully, and some of the darkness in the lyrics and kind of questioning and metaphors. But at the same time, we're not getting a brand new thing here. We're not, but they are kind of, they're bringing these influences into their world, as opposed to trying to wear these larger influences in order to become this big stadium band, or because they're now used to playing around doing world tours. They're like, well, we have to write songs that are more universal, and they are kind of doing that. But I think this record overall as well, I mean, it's also a short record. It's 37 minutes, 11 tracks, and I think it benefits from that as well. So it kind of flies by very quickly. Yeah, currently, if I was to give this a ranking in terms of where I put them, I mean, Doggerel is his own thing, I think, now at this point.
Definitely,
This band are never going to go back to that, and I don't think they should. But yeah, I kind of feel like this is my favorite of the four so far in terms of the album on its own, or certainly of the last three. And I do feel like those three were the trilogy, is what they always said. They were like, this is part of a trilogy, and Romance does feel like the start of a new chapter. It's a start for Grian. It's where the vocals become more varied. Musically, it's where they become a bit wider in their influences. And I mean, obviously, we said like visually, they look a bit different, and that was a market thing. And they're not afraid to be. I mean, certainly there was so much chatter about who they were and how they represented their identity and Irish identity and Dublin identity and all this kind of stuff. And I think it's wise just to sweep that away and do something else that doesn't speak to that anymore. So yeah, I think it's a really, I'm really enjoying this album at the moment. So people might be surprised to hear that.
Yeah, I know. Me too. As someone who's definitely not been on the record as being like, they're one of my favorite bands, but they're more a band that I've been like intrigued by. You know, that they're like a band, and like there's something I'm really interested in their trajectory. I'm really interested that they came out of BIM so confident about not just making it in Ireland, but make it beyond Ireland. Like Fontaines D.C. did not believe that they only deserved to be famous and well known in their home country. They believed that they had the right to go global, and I think that that's not a very Irish thing. Like we might have a lot of bands that went global in a way, but I don't think it's very distinctly Irish to believe that you deserve that kind of global fame. And I think that it's really kind of cool to see a band doing that. And I think that there's a kind of lesson there, because I think in Ireland too, we can, people can fall victim to the tall poppy syndrome. We don't like necessarily when people, leave us and decide that actually they can do really well elsewhere. And to maybe placate us in a way, deliberately or not, like Fontaines have always kept those ultra kind of Irish references as they've moved to London and then moved more global. And that keeps us kind of sweet, where we're like, oh, they haven't forgotten us. They're so deeply connected to us. But now they get to this record, 4 records in, they're still really young. Most of them, I think, are just in their 20s. And they've managed
I think
to bring
Grian
out,
is about
you know,
to turn 30, maybe. So
like that's so young. Like there's so much time ahead of them, and that they're kind of still evolving with their sound, I think is really, it bodes really well for the band in terms of like what's to come. And it shows too that they're going from looking internally and looking at that like idea of Irishness and identity, successfully or not, to whatever level people might like or not how they do that. They're going from looking in to looking outwards, and that's really obvious in the lyrics, as we've been saying, because sometimes we're not entirely sure what the lyrics are about. They're slightly more universal, or maybe so personal as to not even ever be universal at all. And also their aesthetic and their look is more nostalgic for a period of time where everybody in the kind of, everybody experienced it regardless of really what country they're from, if you get me. Like that Y2K 2000s look they're leading into isn't Irish. It's like global, you know, or at least kind of Western culture global. And that's an interesting move as well, where they're kind of leaning into maybe nostalgia, like through the video for Favourite, I think, isn't it? Where it's like home videos and stuff like that. So that's like not an Irish nostalgia. That's like a personal nostalgia that people can have for a period of time that's lost. And yet it was only 20 odd years ago or whatever. So yeah, it's really interesting to like, I've enjoyed getting the time to analyze this record and chat about it with you, because I think otherwise it might have passed me by, not passing it by in terms of like not listening to it, but like in terms of analysing it and spending enough time thinking about it.
Do you think Grian is a better, or do you think, what kind of lyricist is he now?
I think he's still kind of figuring out maybe who he is, because I think the fact that a lot of the vocals lyrics on this don't feel 100% fully formed in terms of if we want a narrative out of them. Now, not saying he has to give us a narrative, but saying that like there's a lot of one-off lines that are really good, but we're not too sure what's really going on. Like, I wonder, will he lean further and further towards that like opaqueness and that like being a little bit oblique with what he's writing and not giving people stuff to actually analyse, or giving them stuff to analyse that isn't really overt? Or will he turn around for the next record and be like, I actually want to be more obvious in what I'm saying? And like, that's his choice really. And that's like, I think as listeners, we can demand stuff from like songwriters that they can't give us, but because he's given us from day one lines like, you know, Dublin is a pregnant city with a Catholic mind. Maybe you can ask me off the podcast what I think of that lyric, but like, you know, I'm not a massive fan of it, but like it's still strong and says a very particular thing, and it harks back to like Irish history with like mother and baby homes and treatment of women and patriarchy and blah blah blah, and Dublin is a city, and we're not getting that on this record, right? So I wonder, is he turning away from being like so obvious, or maybe he'll turn back towards that bit more obviousness to the next one. He clearly sees himself as a poet, I think, anyway. And poets can do whatever they want with their words, you know?
Yeah, for sure. So I asked the Discord, which is our place, the Niler 9 Discord, which is, if you want access to that, it's patreon.com/Niler9. Just before we jumped on here, if anyone had any thoughts on the Fontaines, I won't name anyone in this, but one of the responses is, I'd have been hoping they would make something undeniable to allay my doubts, because they have shown an admirable instinct for sonic expansion over the past 3 albums. I want to like this band. At the end of the day, I just don't buy Chatten as a writer of any substance. He's always gestured to our subjects without truly evocative or insightful. And there's always at least one song in each album that is painfully, thuddingly parodically by numbers lyrically, Bloomsday or In the Modern World in this example. Big band, yes. Great band, no. And that Chatten fella is only a cod bill. So
oof, gosh.
For the contrast there, thought I'd include that as well. So not everyone convinced. But I also like, there's a part of me that is like, I don't want to be the Irish music person who hates the Fontaines either. So, and I am interested in them. I am interested in what they do. I think they can write very good, like songs that, you know, they don't have to change the world. None of these songs have to change the world, but like certainly songs like Favourite and Starburster here are the ones that I will take with me. And maybe I do like In the Modern World, and here's the thing. So there you go. So.
Yeah, like, would you like to ask you a question about it? Like, do you ever connect with their lyrics emotionally? Because I think that's the key to me to whether I like the lyrics. Like, I don't feel like I connect them emotionally.
No, but I mean,
that's not their, you know,
like they're 10 years younger than me. Should I connect with where they are coming from now? I mean, their experience is so far away from where I am now, you know. And I think it's hard to expect that. That's why when the first album came out, it was very much like it was easier to connect to that. They were,
Yeah.
you know, their first video was like set in the, like around, in and around the Workman's and where I was hanging out all the time. You know what I mean? So you're like, there is that getting pizza in Fontaine, D Fontaine's, which is maybe that's where their name came from. Do you know what I mean? So like, it's hard to know, but yeah. I mean, I kind of like studying where they're at now and seeing. I haven't seen them live for a while. I think I'd like to see them. They're playing in the 3 Arena later this year, 2 big shows. So I think I'd like to see them again. It's been a while. So I think that might be a good way of kind of figuring out where I sit with it, because like I do enjoy some of the records, but I don't go back to them as much. But what is interesting to me is that like all the time, all of the reviews of this album are hugely positive.
They really, really are.
5 out of 5 all over, like a lot of the, and I don't really understand that myself. I'm like, yeah, okay, good album, great album. Don't know. I mean, it's a good album. I think it's a good album. I think it's a really, for them, it suggests longevity. It suggests a new chapter. It suggests a band who have the possibility to move on and do things and not just be stuck in the same cycle of doing the same thing over and over again. I think that's to be applauded. And I think it's a really good record. Is it a brilliant record? Probably not for me, but I still enjoy it. And that's more than a lot of the chat we've had about the Fontaines previously on this podcast. So, you know, it's positive. It's overall a positive thing.
Yeah. And I think, I was just thinking there when you were talking about what you're saying about the reviews, that like the area that they are moving into musically on this that we've mentioned, you know, kind of shoegaze, grunge, they're 2 areas that are having a massive moment with kind of Gen Z at the moment, right? Yeah. So younger listeners are going back and listening to the records that like we listen to, our older brothers and sisters or cousins or whatever listen to. And so they're not leaning into new sounds and genres that are not taken seriously or that people don't like or that there isn't a willing and existing audience for. And I think that really benefits them, that they are evolving into a sound that's nostalgic to a period that a lot of music listeners of all different ages are also nostalgic about at the moment. And I would wonder what would happen if they turned around and went for leaning towards a genre that's not really having its day at the moment, how that would work for them. So they're both like a reflection of their time, because like how could they not be influenced by these things? How could they not like express their love for it in music? But at the same time, like, so they're a reflection of that, but is there another side to them that they're not expressing because it's just not really cool to express that? It's clever of them, though, to express that kind of that love for that music at a time, and they know other people are going to be really open to it as well too. And I don't mean that in a cynical way necessarily, but if you're really kind of getting down to brass tacks about what it means to evolve, you know, whether or not people like your album, part of that does depend on what they feel about those sounds at that moment in time. And we reassess albums all the time, don't we? Where we go, oh, actually that was great and it got panned, you know. So.
Well, I'm still waiting for the Fontaines to release their disco record, which they promised once, and maybe they'll do that. I'd love to hear it. The closest we've got is the Soul Wax remix of A Hero's Death, which I absolutely love. But yeah, I'm like, maybe we'll get a disco record next. Maybe not. I'm sure they seem to be ahead of themselves a lot of the time. They're half written tracks and half written lyrics by the time things have come out. They're not quite as prolific as Big Thief in that regard, but they do keep on keeping on, and they are constantly evolving. So I think, Romance, another interesting notch in the Fontaines discography. Aoife Barry, thanks you so much for joining me to chat about Fontaines Romance. Is there anything you'd like to plug? You wrote a book recently, and now it was recent enough. So
thanks so much. No, thanks to Millie. It's been so great chatting with you about this record. It's always just so good to just sit and chat and analyze a record. It's really, really fun. Loved it. So thank you. I have a book called Social Capital. So if people like reading about social media and how people behave on social media, mostly badly, then you can pick that up in bookstores. It's got a big bright orange cover, and so it's kind of hard to miss. And I write a column in the Sunday Times every Sunday in Culture Magazine about the arts. So if people want to read that too. And then I have a newsletter, sweetoblivion.substack.com, that I also kind of riff on more personal thoughts on culture as well too. So those are the places that you'll find me.
Great. I don't even know if I'm on your Substack, so that's great. I didn't even know that. There you go.
Hurrah.
So many Substacks.
There's a lot of
Need
subtracts
to
currently
get-
happening today.
Never
Yeah,
have
and-
too many. Never have too
No,
many.
exactly. We're both from the era of music blogging back in the early days when the Fontaines were but wee children, Niall, aren't we?
Yeah,
so like we really know
we
that.
We babbies.
Yeah, we've
Okay,
been there
great.
through all the iterations.
Well, check out Aoife's Sweet Oblivion Substack. And Aoife Barry, thanks so much for coming on and talking about the Fontaines.
Thank you, Niall.
Cheers.
So here's the thing, I know you're watching, I feel your pain, it's mine as well. I know you're right, I know you're right, girl. And if you change your mind, I will be waiting. I know you're fast, then mine as well. I know you're right, I know you're right, girl.
Will full coverage make me look cakey? Is my undertone neutral or is it cool? We get it. Finding the right foundation is hard. But with Il Maquillage, it's easy to find your perfect match online. Customized for your unique skin tone and coverage needs. Plus, with Try Before You Buy, you can try your full size at home for 14 days. With over 600,000 five-star reviews, this best-selling foundation is going viral for a reason. Take the Power Match quiz now at ilmaquillage.com/quiz. ILMAKIAGE.com/quiz.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states.
Thanks for listening to the 909 podcast. If you like what we do, why not consider supporting us at patreon.com/909.